think we'd like to go ahead and get started, if we could. Going to speak to you today about big data innovation for sustainable development. My name is Robert Kirkpatrick. I direct the Global Pulse Initiative in the Secretary General's office at the UN. I'm very grateful to our colleagues in UN Statistics Division and our hosts, Statistics South Africa, for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. So, specifically, I'd like to address the opportunity to harness big data for the SDGs. For those who aren't aware, Global Pulse is an innovation lab for the UN system, exploring how to use new sources of digital data, real-time information for global development and humanitarian action. And our long-term vision, as you can tell from the name, is essentially about a world in which it's possible to measure human well-being in real time, as easily as one might measure the weather today. We work to try to create public goods out of big data. So you can see some of our labs. We have a network of labs in New York for our headquarters, and then Kampala, Uganda, and Jakarta, Indonesia, where we work in partnership with government, UN agencies, private sector, academia, civil society organizations, to discover new kinds of approaches, build tools, test them, and evaluate them, and also work to contribute to changes in public policy around the use of this information and the protection of privacy. So there's a lot of data out there. What you see here is a map of Kampala, downtown Kampala, through Twitter. There's Cape Town. Lots of tweets going on in Cape Town. What's interesting about this kind of content is that when you filter out the conversation about sports and celebrities and everything else, what you find is people talking about basic necessities: the price of food, the affordability of healthcare, the impacts of a natural disaster. What you see here is a visualization created of the morning commute of about 14 million people in Jakarta. And this is produced through visual analysis of anonymized call records. Essentially, every time you make or receive a call or send or receive a text, the cell tower through which that information, through which the service is placed, is recorded. So it turns out every mobile operator in the world is basically running a network that allows them to see human movement in real time on a massive scale. How are people being displaced by a disaster? How is their movement spreading a dangerous disease? Why are women in this area going all the way over here for health care when there are two clinics nearby? This is a visualization produced by BBVA that looks at credit card transactions in 2011 over Easter weekend. The point here is to simply say that any financial institution in the world can see how much money people have, where they spend it, whether they choose to spend it on groceries, which is blue, or fuel, which is yellow, or alcohol, which is red at night. The point is that they can see this kind of information, and we have to find the partnership models to unlock it for public policy. Here you see hundreds of thousands of ships moving about the world. This is AIS tracking beacon data, and if you zoom in, that little knotted cluster is a type of event. We're working with some artificial intelligence technology to try to learn to recognize a rescue event, in this case a capsized ship in the Mediterranean, when all the ships veer off course to assist. So it's really thrilling to be here. We were part of the Secretariat, along with UN Statistics, that helped produce the World That Counts report on the data revolution. One of the three recommendations out of that report was the creation of a World Data Forum, and it's a reality. Incredibly exciting to be here. When we talk about sort of a revolution, this is sort of how we see the revolution if you look at the role of big data. Survey data is sort of like high-resolution color photography. It's very precise. It lets you understand not only what's happening in some cases, but why. You can get rich, multidimensional information, subjective information. Big data is passively produced just by people going about their daily lives as they buy and sell goods, as they move through cities, as they search on the internet. It's not necessarily going to tell you why something's happening, but it's more like video. It allows the continuous observation of human behavior. And we think the really extraordinary opportunity for the SDGs is combining precise measurement with the real-time feedback loops that allow you to take corrective action when your policies and programs aren't working. There are probably 3 different data revolutions, at least, already underway in the world. One, where we see big data having a role is in the measurement revolution, transforming how we generate information for indicators. But secondly, there's what we call the management revolution. And this is really about being able to change how we operate, having more nonlinear, adaptive, learning-based, agile organizational processes, more efficient and effective so that we can work smarter. And finally, an accountability revolution, building on the work of the open data community as we move toward a world of open insights. One of the challenges with the SDGs is that, in the world of the MDGs, most of the data needed to achieve those goals was data that was collected, owned, and used by government. But we believe most of the data needed to achieve the SDGs is that is produced passively by people going about their lives, collected in real time by machines, and owned by corporations. So that's a very fragmented landscape in which to implement a very challenging agenda. The kinds of data sources we're talking about fall into these 2 broad categories, sort of what people say and what people do. The former is more or less open, though it doesn't fit in your spreadsheet, but we're talking about social media, online information, subjective, perceptual information, but it has its utility. What people do, this kind of richer behavioral information produced by the use of digital services, very, very powerful, very, very sensitive from a competitive standpoint in the eyes of companies, and very, very dangerous from a privacy perspective in its raw form. So it's trickier to work with these data sources. Every type of data that we work with, unless it's been explicitly shared with consent, everything we work with is anonymized. No confidential information of any kind in these data sources. So we have a set of data privacy principles that have been co-developed for us by with our data privacy advisory group to make sure that we're not creating new risks in the process of trying to help. About 5 years ago, we started engaging with private sector around this idea we call data philanthropy, saying to companies and different industries around the world, let's figure out how you could share some of the data that powers your business or insights from it in a way that protects privacy and protects your own competitiveness in the market, but could still be useful in the fight against hunger, poverty, and disease. This has absolutely exploded. We've seen companies now starting to hire data philanthropy managers. This is becoming a global movement, and it's really exciting. And we're seeing companies now seeing data philanthropy as part of their core strategy on the 2030 agenda. Companies see a huge opportunity to put their data to work for public good. So there's this sort of ocean of real-time information out there, and one way to think about this is as a kind of new natural resource, right? It's increasingly ubiquitous, it's infinitely renewable, but it's, it has some challenges that come along with it. First of all, we've used the term data mining. Big data has arguably fallen prey to an extractive industry, right? The people who need its benefits most aren't receiving them. The skills needed to unlock this kind of information are in the hands of the elites. And another challenge with the information is that in its raw form, if you think about this as sort of like equivalent of a metallic ore of some kind, iron ore, in its raw form, it comes intermingled with your personal data. So you don't want this stuff out there on its own. So it does have some kind of affinity, perhaps, with nuclear energy, right? Its nature in its raw form is to leak and contaminate. So I think as a society, we're facing now a moment analogous to the 1950s when the world had seen the horrors of nuclear war and now said, oh, but we could power cities for 1,000 years with this stuff. But how do we contain it safely? How do we mitigate the risks? How do we govern it? One of the challenges, of course, with all of this data is privacy. Right? People today are living their lives with no awareness or very little awareness of the risk that they create in creating this data, and most people would argue that privacy laws today are inadequate to protect people from the risk with big data. But there's another problem that goes along with that. Here you see a visual analysis of movement patterns in and out of Kampala from mobile phone data, and the point here is to say that this kind of information has been shown to be very useful for modeling the spread of diseases like cholera, malaria, dengue. The challenge is that To really stop a disease, you need to know where to draw a quarantine zone, for example. So if you're in rural Uganda, for example, a certain level of disaggregation might tell you exactly where you need to draw that quarantine zone because you could see where the disease could have been transmitted. But the privacy risk increases the more you disaggregate. If you aggregate the data to further protect privacy, the uncertainty increases. And at a level where privacy is very, very secure, you may have no ability to control the spread of the disease. So we're moving toward a world in which we really need to start thinking about, privacy as a source of risk, misuse of data, but so is non-use of this data. This is a failure in the responsibility to protect people from harm, not only against misuse of the data, but a failure to protect people from harm by using the data. We need to figure out how to balance these different risks in terms of the SDGs so that we can move toward a world in which people know that they can expect not only that they'll be protected from privacy breaches, but that they'll know that information was used for better service delivery, better early warning, and better disaster response. So let's imagine that it's 2030 and the SDGs have been achieved, but people are running around, let's say 7 billion people running around with a device that costs $5, or maybe it's free, that tracks in real time everything you say, everything you feel, everything you think, everywhere you go, everything you buy and sell, you search for, you look at, and the functioning of every organ in your body. I mean, an Apple Watch does 70% of that right now. Now, a world in which transparency could become, society could become transparent, a world in which it's theoretically possible for everything that happens to be known in real time, is that an enlightened society or the stuff of dystopian nightmares? Well, I think that's up to us as the human race to figure out, and we have to decide what safeguards can be put in place technologically, methodologically, in terms of policy, ethics, to make sure that some kinds of information can be known by all, some kinds can be known only to you, and some kinds perhaps can only be known by certain pieces of software in certain cases. We've created something we don't yet know how to manage to the degree that it needs to be. Now, if this works, we're going to see something incredibly exciting, which is the ability to see what's happening in hunger, in poverty, in disease, in real time, anywhere in the world, as easily as we can look at temperature, barometric pressure, cloud cover. But we're not there yet. We need a public-private partnership architecture for the world and the policy frameworks to support this. And we need citizens to understand that they are producing the information that will be needed to achieve the SDGs. So we've reached now a tipping point in the formation of the data ecosystem that's going to be needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Companies are seeing data philanthropy as something they want to do. Regulators are looking at ways to manage privacy risk, but also risks of non-use. Practitioners, policymakers are starting to ask for solutions and saying, if I had access to those insights right now, this is how I would use them to change development outcomes. So what I'd like to do today is to just give you a quick synopsis of what's going to happen. We're going to have a presentation of operational real-time data innovation projects that are being done by Global Pulse, followed by a panel discussion on the opportunities for impact and some of the challenges with implementing and scaling these solutions. It's going to feature high-level representatives from government, private sector, and the UN. Then we'll have a few lightning talks from the emerging data ecosystem on some of the new resources out there around the space. Our session will end with remarks by Bitange Ndemo, Associate Professor at the University of Nairobi Business School in Kenya, former Permanent Secretary of Kenya's Ministry of Information and Communication, and I'm proud to say a member of our Data Privacy Advisory Group. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Paula Hidalgo Sanchez, Manager of Pulse Lab Kampala in Uganda. She will give a brief introduction of some of the data innovation projects we've developed in our innovation labs in New York, Kampala, and Jakarta. Paula.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning, everybody. My name is Paula Hidalgo Sanchez, and I work as manager in Pulse Lab Kampala, one of the 3 labs in the UN Global Pulse Network. I'm going to do a brief presentation of digital applications that have been developed in different countries to use data to advance the SDGs. All the digital applications I'm going to show you have three things in common. The data that is used is generated by people as they go on with their daily lives. The data analysis is done in real time. And third, the applications use new types of data analytics that are commonly used by private sector. I invite you to look at the applications with an open mind. While we all know that big data cannot represent universe of analysis the way other type of data does, I invite you to look at them with an open mind to see the opportunities that big data has to offer to generate statistics. Let me take you now to the first application, an application to do radio mining. This application has been developed with our partners at Stellenbosch University here in South Africa. As in many other countries in the world, radio is used in Uganda as a social media platform for people to express their opinions and share experiences. In this case, the digital data that the application makes accessible for the SDGs is public radio content, public radio discussions. How does it work? The application transforms the words spoken in Acholi and Luganda to native languages in Uganda into text. What you see here in this slide is how audio looks like, and you see in this square the word floats. So you have the audio, floats, and the transcript, the text. Okay? The text is then analyzed using data mining technique. This way, public discussions around topic of interest for the SDGs can be analyzed. How is this useful for the SDGs? Can be used for different things, and we are right now testing this with different pilots that we're implementing with partners. For example, we can generate statistics of local natural disasters and associated losses, because people talk about these things on the radio. There was a flood in the village. This road has been damaged. 3 cows died of lightning in this village the other day. There is a reporting of these events. We can also, for example, understand how communities experience public service delivery, health service delivery, for example. People really talk about what happens when you go to the clinic and the doctor is or is not there, and the doctor is asking or not asking for fees, etc. And we can also analyze people's opinions related to gender-based violence, just to give you some examples on how this can be used for the SDGs monitoring and achievement. I take you now to the second application. This is an application to conduct automatic identification and counting from satellite imagery. And what is it that we are identifying and counting? Roofs. This application has been developed with the University of Edinburgh, and we are about to launch it in Uganda with partners in governments to measure and monitor SDG 1. As many of you will know, the type of roof in a household in Uganda, as in many other countries, is a proxy indicator of poverty. As the household economy improves, people invest in the roof, and it changes. So what this application does is to identify different types of roofing materials automatically and count them automatically. This is just a demo. You can see all the red crosses is thatched roof identify. How is this useful for the SDGs? Well, the application detects and counts automatically. So you can imagine that we can establish trends on changes in poverty in a country, just analyzing automatically. I take you to a very different one. This is the third application I'm going to show you out of 6. This application is about smart waste management. We have developed this application with our partners at UNICEF to support operations in an emergency setting. The application supports the work at the Satari refugee camp in Jordan. What digital data are we using here? Two types of digital data. We're using data that is generated by GPS trackers that are installed in water tanks. And we are using data that is reported by people living in the camp through a complaint center. The analytics that are generated automatically in real time are replacing the work that was done manually. Imagine 2.1 million liters of wastewater collected every day, and the calculations were done manually. How is this useful for the SDGs? I'll let you just enjoy the video. What you see in the video is in real time how the water trucks are doing the route in the camp. You see there's one that is going away outside the camp, taking a tour, and it will later come back. So how is this useful? The application is used to optimize waste management in the camp. It's used to increase accountability on service delivery. I take you now to the next one. This is an application developed with the Spanish bank, BBVA. In this case, we built a prototype to explore for the first time the use of financial transactions in the context of a natural disaster striking. We developed these prototypes to analyze patterns of ATM transactions before, during, and after Hurricane Irene struck in Mexico. The exercise has a value because for the first time, in real time, people's expenditure and ATM withdrawals were analyzed. What you see in the graph is the following. You see this green bar that's the date of the hurricane striking. And then on the top, we see the expected ATM withdrawals from historical analysis. And the lower line shows you the real, okay? How is this useful for the SDGs? It can be useful to inform better preparedness ahead of hurricanes, better understand patterns of behavior during the hurricane to inform response, and to better understand impact and monitor resilience of communities. What you see here in these graphs is how long it took for different communities, the 4 different graphs, different communities in different places, how long it took them to go back to the same level of expenditure or ATM withdrawals. I'm approaching to the last one. Application for crisis response. This has been developed by our colleagues in Jakarta, Pulse Lab Jakarta. The application is called HaserGazer, and it's an analytics and visualization platform that has been developed with our partners in government to support crisis response. Petland fires in Indonesia generate haze crisis in Southeast Asia. This application analyzes data generated in real time by a combination of different data sources. It processes data generated from satellite imagery, data reported by citizens through a national complaint system, and data shared by citizens through social media platforms and in YouTube. How is this useful for the SDGs? The application mines all relevant data about haze and makes it accessible in real time in a friendly platform to support the response on haze. And the last application of the 6 that I promised, this is an application to monitor in real time discussions about food prices with social media. This application was developed with our partners at the UN World Food Programme and Government of Indonesia again. And this application was developed in the context of Indonesia, where 90% estimated population is using Twitter on a daily basis. In this context, people discuss about things that affect their lives, as, for example, fluctuation in food prices. Data mining in social media has been used over decades in private sector. This was the first time it was used to inform SDGs. And how is this useful? Well, it tells you in real time, real data about fluctuation in food prices that have a huge impact in people's life on a daily basis. With this, I finish my presentation of the 6 applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. For those who are interested, there's a workshop tomorrow from 5 to 6:30 in the roof terrace where we're going to have an opportunity to learn more about some of these applications and others and get your hands on them and try them out. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our panel who are coming on stage. Our distinguished speakers are going to discuss the key challenges and opportunities in harnessing big data to achieve sustainable development in today's complex and ever-changing world. For concern of time, I'm going to just briefly introduce them. Their complete biographies are available on the Global Pulse website, unglobalpulse.org, for those who wish to see. Our moderator, Daniel Runde, is William A. Schreier Chair and Director of the Project on Prosperity and Development at the Center for Strategic and International Studies at CSIS. His work centers on leveraging American soft power instruments and central roles of the private sector in good governance and creating a more free and prosperous world. Enda Ginting works for the Executive Office of the President of Indonesia on priority program management. In this capacity, he focuses on the Food and Nutrition Agriculture Program, fiscal reforms, and the Sustainable Environment Financing Portfolio. Dr. Mallory Soldner has spent years researching how to do the most good with data. In 2014, she earned her PhD in industrial engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology. Her thesis explored how to measure and improve humanitarian operations in practical ways, with a special focus on the use of algorithms. Juan Murillo Arias is in charge of territorial analysis at BBVA Data Analytics, whose work in the hurricane analysis you just saw. This is a new company within the BBVA company family, created to extract the value enclosed in financial data. And also Dr. Arif Hussain, who is Chief Economist and Director of the Food Security Analysis and Trend Service at the United Nations World Food Program. In Rome, he joined WFP in 2003, and since then has served in many senior positions, both in the field and at headquarters. He's also worked for the World Bank. Arif's work focuses on analyzing food security and welfare conditions in developing countries to inform humanitarian response. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I think a couple things to say, which is that the world has changed from even 2 or 3 years ago, in that there are a series now of cases and examples of new technologies and big data being used to demonstrate insights and pilots. I think what the challenge is going from the pilot stage to the scale stage. And so I think the conversation we're going to have today is to talk about some of the pilots. And then what I'm hoping to do is for our panel to talk about what it's going to take for their ideas to go to scale and to generate a conversation as well for this audience to be thinking about for the rest of the time that we're together over the next several days. We have a very distinguished group of panelists. I think you've heard where each of them are from. I'm going to start first with Mr. Enda Ginting, who is with the President's Office of Indonesia and has a specific example to share. Go ahead, Enda. The floor is yours.
Hi. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Enda. I'm not a statistician. I'm not a data expert. Me and my office represent a business process, so we're all about plug and play, meaning innovations out there, we try to plug it so that the policies can play that. Second of all, I think related to what the opening was saying about public-private partnership, if I won't get it wrong, one of our roles is to make sure that before the public and the private could partner, the internal government's got to partner themselves. And in doing so, I'll elaborate further. So that's probably an intro about myself. Thank you.
Great. Enda, but maybe what we do is why don't we just go ahead and why don't you just share a little bit about the example about what you've been working on, and then we'll go down the line. Go ahead.
So essentially, what you have is the fundamental, typical business process government of how delivering, yeah? And they've got the data and they've got the governance around it. What we come in is to try to fix that so that there's a robust way of saying this data shows for that policy. At the same time, you know that there's innovations out there. Now, what we're trying to do is bring it in and say, look, your policy says X, Y, and Z. There's innovation out there that says difference. Back to the original idea is that it's all about service delivery. Now, some of these functions may work, some of them doesn't work, right? So what you got to keep in mind is you've got these innovations, and I'd like to use the word nuts and bolts, because some of these innovations may be innovative, but if the processors are not able to digest them, they're not going to be used. So there's a careful judgment that we make in how much of this innovation can actually help change the business process. The idea is to get cabinet and within the government to get used to processing things outside of what their own data says, because if it's not in their radar, they're not going to be able to capture the specific data. But if you can prove in the cabinet, if you can prove in government that a different way of looking at things produces a different results, then I think we're one step closer to getting where how you implement big data in government.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Enda. Now I have Mallory Soldner, who's with UPS. I was most impressed by the fact that Mallory had a past life trying to improve the efficiencies of how you visit Disney World. Actually, that's a true statement, right? You actually did, one of the things, in addition to being a PhD engineer, she actually has figured out how to visit Disney World in the most efficient way possible. I'm sure any of you who have visited Disney World know it's actually quite complicated. She's also got, I have a lot of envy, she has on her LinkedIn site, she has a downloaded video from a TED Talk with 760,000 downloads of her talk, which I recommend you watch, about corporate data being important for the SDGs. So I encourage you to visit Mallory's LinkedIn page and take a look at her 760,000 page downloaded video about data and what it means for development. So Mallory, you have a lot of experience, both at a company level, you're also at the World Food Program. Talk about what UPS is doing. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dan. So, bottom line, optimization can play a huge role in using data to improve people's lives. So I have a background that's on the UN and academic side, and now I work in the private sector. And the private sector absolutely has a role to play. The TED Talk that Dan referenced is all about data philanthropy, which has also been brought up in this session. So companies donating their data, companies donating their data scientists, so the people who can actually work with the data, and also companies donating technology to capture data that's not already being captured. One example I can share from UPS's portfolio is around that last term, donating technology. So right now, as refugees are streaming into Greece, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, they have their hands full. So their current system is using paper and pencil to track people as they come in. And what that means is that headquarters is essentially blind to that real-time moment when a mother and her 5 kids walk into a camp. But that's changing, and it's all thanks to private sector partnership with the public sector. And so there's a new system based on donated package tracking technology from UPS that's being used to track, so you know exactly the moment when that mother and her 5 children walk into the camp, but you also know whether she'll have supplies this month and the next. There's many other examples that I can highlight as well from other companies and from the time at World Food Program in the UN. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think a lot of government agencies are still at the pencil and paper stage, and so I think that I don't think that's the only example of that. And so I think these sorts of technologies, one of the challenges is going to be how do we get these new technologies to be fully adapted and used in ways that are for policymakers and decision makers. So I think this is going to be one of the critical challenges going forward. Thank you for that. Juan Mario Arias, you're with BBVA Data and Analytics. And so I think there have been some examples that were shown earlier by Paula of an example of some of your work. I had a past life in commercial and consumer banking in Argentina 15 years ago, and there was none of the kinds of data and the kind of analytics that you're doing just wasn't present when I was in the financial sector 15 years ago. It's a very different ballgame. So over to you, Juan.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Well, it's a honor to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I would like to say that because of my background, I'm urban planner. I was used to read a territory based on static data. Now, we have changed our mindset. And this is the same path that official statistics offices should work. We have many dynamic data sources now available. In our bank, in BBVA, we are dealing with one of them, which is very descriptive. Of course, we are using this data source in principle in BBVA Data Analytics to improve our value proposition to our customers, improving our services, improving our our financial services. We are analyzing fraud detection. We are working with risk scoring. But beyond the use of personal data, there is a big value in anonymized data statistics, aggregation, data aggregation. And here is where the traditional statistics discipline and big data meet. And we are working together with, for example, in Mexico, with the Ministry of Tourism. They're analyzing tourism dynamics based on payments. We can get to know what are the interests of the visitors in the country, what are their itineraries, their paths. And the project we carried out with United Nations Global Pulse was very enriching for us. It taught us a lot about methodology, about what are the proper questions. We think that public administration must make the questions, and we can provide some answers based on this kind of dynamic data that in most cases are in the hands of private corporations. So talking about our motivations, well, it's a honor for us to work in this kind of data for social good projects. It's a honor for us, and it also improves our innovative ecosystem. We join a very interesting network of people working in this field. But there are also many other motivations. Our team is eager to join these kind of projects, but I have to say that these are pilot projects. If we want to think about solutions in productions, working with real-time data, this will require some investment, this will require some development, and perhaps in that field, the social, corporate social responsibility model doesn't work so well. So we have to find a business model for these kind of products. And if governments decide that some physical investments in works, for example, to prevent flows, deserve a budget, and if we do agree that knowledge can save lives, can spread prosperity, it will deserve some investments as well.
Excellent.
And that's our point.
Excellent. Everyone gets extra credit points. Everyone's going very quickly through their presentations, so everyone gets extra kudos. I'm going to buy everybody a cappuccino afterwards in the coffee bar for going so quickly. This is great. Arif, thank you for being here. Arif, you're the chief economist at the World Food Program. I can only imagine the way data would matter, and big data and new forms of data would matter to the World Food Program. Thank you for being here.
No, thanks for having me. For those of you who don't know, World Food Program is the largest humanitarian agency in the UN system. We assist about anywhere between 80 to 100 million people each year whose food security may be in jeopardy because of some man-made or natural shock. We have presence in over 70 to 80 countries, and we are voluntarily funded. And our plan of our budget is about $5 to $6 billion per year. Now, I tell you all of this because if we are going to be assisting people, then we need to answer some very basic questions in terms of what happened, who's affected, where they are, how many they are, what type of assistance will they require, and for how long. Now, if you look at these questions, they were valid 50 years ago. If something happened, people asked the same questions. And today, if something happens, people ask the same questions. But the difference is how quickly we can answer those questions. And this is where big data, real-time data, open data starts to make a difference. Also, because of our job, because of the operational implications of our job, we use big data which exist, but we also produce big data because we have deep field presence. And when we go and we see what is happening in the deep field, we bring that out and we share that as a public good, which then others can also use. More specifically, in terms of the things which we are doing on the big data side and real-time side, I think Robert mentioned a couple of those. One is our mobile technologies. We are using SMS, robocalls, live calls to ask people about their food security situation in terms of what are they eating, how often they are eating, their coping mechanisms, how markets are performing. And all of this information just to know if things are going well in these countries. And if not, then you can focus in, you can deep dive in places where you find some anomaly. And that is the power of big data, in fact, because that allows you to target places based on some information. It doesn't mean that something is going on, but it makes you more selective in terms of targeting places where you see that something is happening. When we are using mobile technologies, what we find is that it is much more safer. For example, you could do this in Ebola-stricken countries. You can do this in conflict areas. It is cheaper, and it is faster when you consider it compared to face-to-face. Also, Robert mentioned use of call detail records. We have now experienced that in both earthquake in Nepal, as well as in Hurricane Matthew in Haiti, where we use call details information, meaning when you make a phone call, certain parameters of those calls are recorded. For example, where you were when you made that call, how long that call was, and where did you call. Using this information before a shock happens, meaning before the hurricane, and after that, you can tell how many people left the place which was hit and where did they go. And for a humanitarian agency and for people, governments working in this is very, very powerful information because first 72 hours are where you want to decide where to go and what to do. And if you can have some certainty in terms of where people are moving, that is really, really useful. The third thing where we are working quite nicely is high-resolution satellite imagery. And on the high-resolution satellite imagery, this becomes very valid when you don't have physical access. Think of the places where right now there is conflict going on, and putting boots on the ground is not necessarily an option. At the same time, maybe you want to do an airdrop of food, and you need to know if there are power lines there, or what is a clear space. High-resolution satellite imagery in real time is something which you can use to deal with that. Also, I'm really, European Space Agency, this has something which is called the Sentinel-2, which is a satellite, which now can cover the entire globe in 5 days. And what this is going to do is to revolutionize our agricultural production estimates. Imagine if you really truly know how much do we actually produce and how much do we actually consume in places like South Sudan. And I think this is also a hugely powerful application of satellite imagery. Last thing, what I wanted to mention was where big data and real-time information is becoming useful is that when we do these big surveys once every 3 years, once every 5 years, the question is what happens in the middle? What about the seasonality? Now, through these technologies, what we can do is we can take a subsample of the population we surveyed, and we can take a subsample of the survey questionnaire that we did, and we can follow them over time. And what that does is it gives us some sense of seasonality between the two endpoints where we do the actual bigger surveys. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so let me ask the panel, I think, 2 questions. I heard a whole lot of interesting things from the presentations that I think Enda's comments about holding the cabinet accountable with outside data and using nuts and bolts innovation, but we're also requiring that bringing to the attention of policymakers new forms of information was critical. I heard from Mallory the issue of the private sector has a unique contribution to make, and that there are still many systems that are still pencil and paper. I don't think it's just specific to UNHCR. I think a lot of systems in many developed countries, including the United States, are still probably on something akin to pencil and paper or Excel spreadsheets, basically, and that there's going to have to be a shift. And then I think Juan's interesting point I'm taking away is the issue of public administration needs to pose the questions, needs to set the agenda. I think that's very interesting. I think it's an important point for us. And so I think one of the questions in my mind when Juan said that was, okay, does the public sector know what questions to ask of the data and understand the technology enough to pose the right questions? So I think that's an important point. And then I think with Arif, that WFP is both a producer and a user of big data, but that on the horizon are some really important innovations, including the satellite imagery. It's going to revolutionize the way we think about famines or food security, because we're going to have a much better concept or handle on the kinds of the situation in real time in places where it's hard to put somebody on the ground with a clipboard, in essence, and go around and look at crops, basically, I think is probably the alternative. Okay, so here's my question to the panelists, given what we've just all heard, which is, okay, what is the biggest short-term opportunity that's on your radar screen? We don't have to go in order, or the other question would be, and what would it take for us to collectively seize that opportunity? Is it a specific partnership? Is it a question of sort of political will? Is it a question of government adopting and understanding this technology better? Is it a question of an aid donor stepping up and writing a $5 million check? What is the specific step that's going to be necessary? Why don't I start with you, Arif, and just let me ask, so what's the biggest short-term opportunity, and what's it going to take for your organization to seize that opportunity?
I think the opportunities, I mean, I was saying this earlier, that 3 or 4 years ago, all of these things which we are talking about, it was kind of like, when this happens, when this happens. Now it is happening. We are already, like MWM I'm talking about, we are already in more than 30 countries we are doing this work. And the thing really, truly is, if you build it, they will come, if you heard that. Right now, the thing is that you show it to people, you show it to the governments, you show it to the private sector, you show it to the civil society, how this information can be used in a meaningful way for decision making. Very, very critical point here is that, like I think Robert said in his, it's like a flow of information. Whatever you see is not necessarily the truth, or it's not necessarily. So 3 years ago, you said you didn't have enough information. Today, you say you have a lot of information, and what needs to be done is to take that information and turn it into something meaningful, which decision makers could see and they could use. If you can show the decision makers these two things, whether they're your donors, whether they're the governments, you have immediate buy-in. If you cannot, and if you just talk about this, it is too abstract for people to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. So Enda, I'm imagining this is a similar challenge or opportunity for where you sit in Indonesia.
Actually, interesting question. I think the biggest next step would be for governments to use it. It's a very good example that HazeGazer was mentioned. So HazeGazer captures a variety of information on the forest fires and what people are talking about in the haze. There's 3 or 4 big things that happens and the public attention, the politics attention goes to, which is, law enforcement, arsoning, poverty. So we had that, and we had it, and we looked at our system and said, oh, what are they saying? You're talking about a machinery who's not used to processing anything new outside of what our statistic office shows us. We didn't conclude anything. We only saw one thing, that no one was actually talking about, what do you cover your face with? Mask. So people are still running out there while there's haze and they're not wearing masks. And we thought, well, why don't we use that? It's not a big thing. It doesn't change the governance around the forest, the poverty that is behind a lot of the haze, years and years of forest fires being burnt, but it allows everyone to say, well, hang on, no one ever looked at that. Let's get our health targeting policies better targeted. But that was a congruence, yeah? So within us and the cabinet, it was lovely talks. But you can imagine a situation where I would be confronting people, or our office would be confronting people and say, WFP's FSVA shows us, and FAO's FSVA shows us that we can use education data to show health outcomes. Female literacy rate indicates the ability of people in rural Indonesia to convert food into nutrients. And the cabinet was like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know we can do that. Well, we're not going to be producing that. So you're imagining two things, the progress of the innovations and the progress of the machinery changing. Often we like to compare, oh, the innovation's gone 1,000 miles and the machinery's just changed 1 or 2. Well, the best thing to do is take anything that can be used out there, because you need to feed the machinery with constant changes so that they get used to, I get confronted with a new data sector to challenge me. Another thing, if I still have time, is the time frame for the construction, because we'd like to imagine in hindsight a lot of the innovation, that's done, that could have been conclusive. Well, at the time the policy was made, and the policy probably needs to take 2 or 3 years before you can come back and say, how do we do it? It doesn't fit the time frame of designing it and the time frame of when the innovation has a certain level of robustness to actually go to the politicians and say, oi, mate, look at this. Yeah, so keep in mind that often for people using innovations within old conventional machinery, you've got to create a little bit of a space for that innovation, and that's where you keep, that's the chance for that 1 or 2 step leap.
Sorry, Anna, I was in Jakarta last year, and I visited the Jakarta City Nerve Center, the traffic nerve center that looked like Star Trek screens with all these, I think you know what I'm talking about. There's this city, and it was set up by the then mayor, who's now the president of the country. So could you just spend just a second talking about does it matter? Do you need political leadership to say, I want new forms of data, I want more information? I mean, it's quite clear that when he was mayor, the president of the country of Indonesia wanted to run a smarter city in Jakarta. And so has that mattered? Has it required some kind of political will? Did your job exist before this president came to office? I mean, does it require some kind of political will for these sorts of things to happen?
The short answer to that is yes. Saying that, without coming in, bringing in data is sort of saying like, that data can defend all the politics, could face all the challenges. We know that data alone needs to be given a context, a little link and a story, needs to be packaged and needs to be sold. So the political drive behind it is needed. But what you can see driving from the Indonesian case is actually a guy who actually wants to deliver. For 17 years, we've had no delivery, because the problem statement of the country at that time for 17 years was that, we could have disintegrated into 30 or 40 different countries. And therefore, the attention was on something else. Now you see pressing demands, tightening fiscal pressures, and everyone all signing up to no one left behind. How do we do this? Clearly upfront and honest, and saying, how much can we do and how much can our machinery process is what we'll do. For the rest, we won't shun them. So that was the drive that gave us our mandate to do our role. And to be honest, without the title of the office, it's probably difficult performing my job.
Right, I'm assuming they take your phone calls because it says Executive Office of the President. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, something like that. But I think a more collegial work allows us to show you and I may be in the opposite ends of the table, but we're looking to address the same thing. And this allows us to sort of collaborate within government. So before we go to the private collaboration.
Great. Okay, Mallory. So what are the biggest opportunities you see in the short term, and what's it going to take for us to seize those opportunities?
Great. So I think it's important to really understand, which I think everybody at this conference does, that the private sector, they have significant data resources. That's in terms of data, that's in terms of people who work with data, and that's in terms of expertise in gathering and digesting data. So in terms of seizing short-term opportunities, I really see it as the intersection of 3 things. So first, there needs to be a need. Second, there needs to be a partnership. And third, it needs to be part of the private sector's competitive edge, so whatever company it is. So for the first point, need, I'd like to echo what Juan said. We need you to come and tell us what it is that's a pressing need. And in terms of partnership, I think it should be, in terms of a short-term win, it's going to need to be an existing partnership. Because anybody that actually works with data knows that it takes a long time to get to know data, to clean it up, and to transform it into something that can be worked into an algorithm. So you're going to want to do something within the set of partners that you already exist and start forging partnerships for what's ahead. And third, it should be part of the private sector's competitive edge in their wheelhouse. And I can give an example of all three of these things. So, for example, after the Ebola crisis, one thing that was clear is that focusing on pandemic preparedness is of major concern for us as a world. And so that was the need. It was articulated, and through existing UPS partners and through the UN as a whole, we've been working with WFP, with World Health Organization on pandemic readiness. There's an overall campaign. And our UPS's competitive edge is our logistics network. And we've been sharing data and information about how our logistic network works and where we have capacity, so that what that means is that if there is another pandemic, there's more information out there from the outset about where you can actually move supplies.
Great. Okay, good. Juan, so biggest opportunity in the short term, and what's it going to take to achieve it?
Well, we have the opportunity of making the data-driven decision process a standard and not the exception, with many practical examples. For example, we can monitorize the Sustainable Development Goals achievement in a very high-resolution way if we merge the official statistics methodology with big data. Now, to leverage this opportunity, we have a much cheaper technology now, thanks to cloud computing. We have the data sources, and even the private sector is opening their data. We are an example of that, for example. And these both, affordable technology, data opening, makes access to data and to information more democratic. Now, we also have challenges. Of course, skills in STEM are required.
Skills in STEM.
In STEM, yeah.
So
data
science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
That's it. That's it. And we need some standards, and we need to
data standards.
Data standards, yeah. For example, if we are developing API services to open our data, and there's no standard, we are perhaps creating our own standard, and the followers will have to do it in the same way. Other ways, we will have different watches delivering different hours or times, and that's a risk.
Okay, so here's a question for this panel, which is: okay, are these new data sets going to supplant or ultimately surpass traditional statistical agencies, and traditional statistical methods? Or are they going to be complements to? So if I'm a developing country and I have a statistical agency and I've spent 30 or 40 years creating a statistical agency, is this going to be like the equivalent of cell phone telephony, where you leapfrog a traditional telephone system and wires and say, I'm just going to go directly to cell phone telephony? Or is this something where you need both a landline and a cell phone in the case of statistics? I think if you understand what I'm saying. Mallory or Juan, could I ask both of you to respond to that? I'd welcome the other panelists as well.
Well, I'm not a statistician, I'll start with, but I mean, in general, I would see it as complementary. There's always so many nuances when it comes to a data set. Even if you're using it for a very specific application, it's very difficult for that data set to cover all of the possible cases that you'd like it to. There's going to be noise in the data, and that's exactly some of the reasons why the more traditional methods have
We're still going to need them.
You're still going to need them, but you're going to be able to find out a lot more new insights as you bring in other sources.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you.
So complementary.
We are going to complement the traditional.
Complement, not surpass.
Not surpass, not substitute, right? May I give an example?
Yes, please.
We have carried out a research project in which we have replicated the official commercial statistic index in Spain that is made by the National Institute of Statistics in the country based on a survey to 12,500 commerces. And we've done so gathering data from 1 million commerces, so much higher volume. But our data are somehow biased because our cardholders have a higher purchasing power, higher income. They are more urban, so we have a higher representativeness in the capitals.
Okay.
So there's a geographical distribution bias, gender distribution, and so on. So we have to apply sampling methodologies that come from the official the traditional statistic and maths methodology to our big data sample in order to get to relevant insights and to replicate this index. Once done so, we can take the best of the density, of the availability of our data.
Excellent. We only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask everyone to kind of leave us with, okay, if you've got, for the next couple days, I want to ask each of the panelists to think about, like, what is the one message you want this group to leave with from this conversation? So I'll take a stab at it, which is to say, we're at the pilot stage. We're now moving to the scale stage. And so there's still a number of steps that are needed. We need political will. We need folks capable of asking the right questions. And there are perhaps some additional resources that are going to need to be mobilized. It doesn't all have to be money. So those are my 3 points. But I'd welcome each of the panelists and keep it short, like 30 seconds or less. Arif, why don't I start with you?
Okay, so for me, I mean, I've got 6 things, literally words. Number 1, it is established that we have huge potential and scalability is already happening, and it's there. The main thing to do is to turn this big data into knowledge. While we are doing that, we must make sure that the privacy and the security of data and integrity of data is intact. We need to work on the rules and the regulations for using this in the public sector as well as in the private sector. And also, we have to work on the methods to analyze this data. Machine learning is going to be big and has to be big when you're dealing with such large numbers. And hence, open source data code is really important. Bottom line, national ownership and commitment, as well as partnerships. Partnerships with the private sector are important, not only because they are doing this, but also because sometimes it is only a matter of tweaking a private sector technology into something meaningful which could be used for humanitarian purposes. Thank you.
Okay. Juan, just very... Your takeaway.
Great. Now, hopefully in the coming years, we will not talk anymore about these innovative projects, but projects into real production.
Yeah. Going mainstream.
Mainstream, yeah, hopefully.
Okay, great. Mallory?
So my takeaway for everyone is that this is the crowd. We know that data can be used to drive decisions that can save lives. And I just encourage everybody to ask questions and to interact with the people that you have around you. This is an amazing conference. And think about creative ways to create new partnerships. Think about the private sector, think about government, think about academics, and let's bring people together.
Yeah, let me just add to Mallory's point that government is not going to be able to do this alone. Civil society isn't going to be able to do this alone. Academia is not going to be able to do this alone. And the private sector is not going to be able to do this alone, but it's going to require new forms of collaboration, and there's a tremendous role for the private sector in all of this.
Actually, I'd like to sum up the 2 parts of your questions. First of all, for my government counterparts around the world, I think it's important to realize whether you keep on conventional data or the big data, let it become natural, yeah, because each sectors behave differently, you know, whether one surpasses the other. But in order for any of that any judgment to happen, you got to come and look and say, well, we got to get used to conflict. We got to get used to challenging one another. And that will sort of determine which sector leads, whether it's the big data or the conventional data. That's from my side. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. Thanks very much.
thank you. Thank you to our brilliant panelists, and Daniel, thanks very much for your moderation. So we have a few very quick lightning talks just to kind of show you what's happening. The data ecosystem is evolving rapidly, as everyone has noted, and we have some speakers who are going to highlight some of the resources, experience, and key events in this field for those of you who are interested in getting more involved. Let me first ask Ben Kumpf to come up. Ben is Policy Specialist for Innovation in UNDP's Bureau for Policy and Program Support, who explores topics such as behavioral insights, human-centered design, big data, and other practical ways to respond to complexity in development. So he's going to talk about a new guide, which is the result of a collaboration between UNDP and Global Pulse with support from UN volunteers. Ben, tell us about it.
Thanks, Robert. Good morning. I brought something for you on behalf of the team and on behalf of Global Pulse. This guide we released in December targets you and colleagues, you meaning officials from public sector institutions, international organizations, bilateral partners, but also government institutions. This guide is based on 6 country experiments we conducted together with you in Global Pulse. The work was led by our regional leads in the Arab states and Eastern Europe and looked at how can we harness big data to improve our work, policy and program work on the SDGs. So one challenge, for example, was, and this was mentioned in the panel, how can we get real-time information on the levels of poverty from households between surveys? In Sudan, more or less every 5 years, a household survey is done that gives us a heat map. But in between, we don't know what is happening. So together with national partners, we looked at first 2 data sets, imagery from satellites on nighttime lighting and electricity consumption. We ran the data trials and saw this doesn't give us a reliable proxy of poverty levels. We have to add a 3rd data source and see if we get to a reliable proxy. And looked at cell phone data, top up, and indeed came up with a reliable proxy. And this is one of the 6 trials that informed this guide. This guide can walk you through, and it's targeting people who are not data scientists, how to start with identifying opportunities for data innovation, how to map the existing data ecosystem, and it offers you support in formulating a hypothesis. For us, innovation is primarily about testing hypotheses. And another paradigm for us regarding innovation is focus on the change you want to achieve, not the solution. So as Enda mentioned during the panel, we very much look at in this guide at how can you look at the policy environment and ensure that the data innovation you are driving actually informs decision making. So summarizing, I hope you take a picture of those URLs up there because that's where you find the data guide. When you work in a public sector institution, have a look, share it with colleagues who are interested in harnessing the potential of big data for improved policy and programming to achieve the SDGs. If you work in the private sector, still have a look and give us feedback because we're really interested in improving it for the next iteration. And we are curious how this movement will pan out, and we hope that based on our practical experiments, we made a contribution that is practical and applicable for our partners in the UN system and beyond to move this conversation forward and work together for a more effective SDG implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Next lightning talk. Rebecca First-Nichols is Deputy Director of TA2.04, a collaborative technical and advisory initiative of the UN Foundation that works to improve production and use of global gender data. She helps lead partnerships with data-producing agencies as well as TA2.04's management and operations. Rebecca will now talk about big data and the well-being of women and girls. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So as we've seen from the panel, the big data field has seen significant innovations and technological work. The problem is that usually work around technology, conversations around technology, do not really think about women and girls. There are fewer female data scientists, and just in general, it's a very top top-down initiative, and women and girls are often left out. So what we did was, as TA2X, we recognized this gap, and we recognized that the field is evolving very rapidly. And so if we want to make sure that women and girls are included in the conversation, especially as they were front and center in the SDGs, we needed to really enter the space and work with partners like UN Global Pulse and academic researchers who at the time weren't thinking explicitly about women and girls, but recognized that there was so much opportunity. So with the support of Hewlett and Gates Foundations, we commissioned different pilot projects across 3 different types of digital data. So what the first one was looking at geospatial. The Flowminder Foundation developed a really, really interesting methodology that combined, like we were talking about earlier, official statistics, so in this case, the Demographic and Health Survey data, which is a household data set, with geospatial data. And what they did was they developed a methodology to predict where the DHS data had indicators of women's welfare at the district level. They were able to bring this spatial resolution down to 1 kilometer squared so that you could really see pockets of inequality. And they put this on a continuous map that allows very targeted responses to challenges that women and girls are facing. And the second was researchers from MIT used credit card data that was disaggregated by sex along with cell phone data in order to track, and they had data sets. Getting the sex disaggregated data sets is the real challenge here, but with Global Pulse, we were able to access data sets from Mexico City that had a lot of information on women's mobility and expenditure patterns. So traditional survey data shows poverty at the household level, which often masks where women and girls are disadvantaged within the household. And so as more and more women and girls start using these technologies like cell phones and credit cards, we will be able to get individual level poverty data for the first time. And then finally, in the category of internet activity, using Twitter, Global Pulse developed an algorithm that disaggregated Twitter users by sex based on their names and their profile photos. And so they applied that algorithm to a massive global data set to find out how women and girls' priorities on the post-2015 development agenda differed from those of men and boys. And then finally, using that same algorithm, researchers at Georgia Tech were able to look for signals of depression and mental health issues in certain countries based on the way that people, especially adolescent girls, express themselves on Twitter. And so because that is a huge gendered gap and a huge issue facing girls especially worldwide, this is a significant opportunity to find signals of mental health challenges and ways to address them, either online or in the general population. So each of these papers and the synthesis report will be released next month. And so follow us on Twitter at TA2X to learn more. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca. So our next lightning talk is Sri Ganesh Lokanathan. He's team leader for big data research at Learn Asia, where he co-established and leads their multidisciplinary research on big data for development in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. So I will ask you please to come up and tell us what you've been working on.
Thanks, Robert. We are a think tank based in Sri Lanka, active across the Asia-Pacific, emerging Asia-Pacific. The big data work is only in Sri Lanka from 2012 and Bangladesh since late last year. We do the full spectrum of work from doing the data analytics, understanding its implications, to trying to mainstream the use of those insights in government, as well as trying to get government to sort of utilize some of these mechanisms in-house as well. The work that we're doing in transportation and urban planning has been used in some of the projects that are going on right now, specifically the Western Region Megapolis Planning Project, as well as we're doing partnerships with the Ministry of Health, the Urban Development, and ongoing ones that are being established with even the official statistics. Our website will give you more details about the kinds of work that we're doing, but I just wanted to sort of spend this little time to sort of talk about two things, which is the opportunities for creating data partnerships. When we started in 2012, it was a bit like a traveling salesman trying to say, okay, we have these insights, maybe it's of use to you. But we've transitioned from that in this current last few years, from a supply push to sort of demand pull for insights, where that now there's a demand for new data and for new insights from different sources. Not quite sure what they may be asking for yet, but you'll get a call saying, we're doing something in X, Y, and Z. Do you have anything that could shed light on this in some way? So the questions aren't exactly fully formulated that we get, but at least the interest is there, which is kind of important when, I think in the panel that was there earlier, the private sector was talking about, okay, if governments can give us the questions, we can try and answer. But they're not quite sure yet what are the questions that we can answer. So we are trying to fill that void of trying to figure out what are the right questions that they can ask. The other is that, partly because we are based in Sri Lanka, and even in Bangladesh, we have a data lab there, and we have people there, the local context matters in trying to sort of navigate some of the issues that are there, as well as in trying to figure out the opportunities for partnerships that exist. The other sort of, one part of our work is really about trying to reduce the transaction costs for others to get access to private sector data. And it also requires helping the private sector. One of the opportunities that is there is, a lot of the things that we do have private applications as well as public. We are interested in understanding where the poor are. They are interested in understanding where the rich are to serve specified products, etc. So that's the sort of levers that we're using in the countries that we're working at. And I think going down for the next year at least, it's going to be, I'll echo what Rebecca said, it's scaling up. So hoping to do something large with the Official Statistics Organization there, as well as with the epidemiology unit in actually tracking dengue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Ganesh. Dr. John Quinn, a data scientist at our lab in Kampala, whose research interests are in machine learning, data science, and artificial intelligence, and particularly in the use of techniques from these fields to address information gaps and practical problems in developing countries. John, will you please tell us some more about the Data Science for Africa initiative?
Sure, thank you, Robert. Good afternoon. Data Science Africa is a network of practitioners. We're interested in new forms of data, new analytics methods, and new applications, which are relevant to the African context. It's a broad group. We have academia, private sector, government, and UN. And the main activity is our annual meeting. You can see here, Kampala. We hosted Data Science Africa and Pulse Lab Kampala this year. The first meeting was in Kenya, in Nyeri. We have two areas of focus in these meetings. And one is an emphasis on young people entering the field, or people entering from different fields. And so we begin these meetings with a series of lecturers training in machine learning, data mining, and so on, skills which may not be otherwise commonly easy to obtain. And the purpose there is to develop these local heroes who are the ones who could take forward this agenda. And we spend some time in the meetings thinking about what can happen with training and mentorship so that the unique mixture of skills which is required to make this a reality can happen and flourish within Africa. The second focus of these meetings and the network in general is to bring together the people developing the methods, the analytics, the technology, and the end users of this. So part two of each of these meetings is a workshop in which we talk about different categories of potential application. And these are quite wide-ranging. We heard this year, for example, about measuring biodiversity with audio hardware installed in the forests of Kenya. We heard about different machine learning methods for satellite analysis, both daytime and nighttime imagery, different types of very interesting applications available in both of those cases. GPS traces and call detail records, for example, for traffic and urban planning, including in South Africa. And just one more example, public health and medical data, and how can we use new analytics methods, for example, to address the gaps where there's missing data in official statistics. Can we bring in other data sources to help interpolate? So that's, I think, what I'll say now. We warmly invite new participants, so I would kindly invite you to peruse the information online. Consider joining us in Arusha in July this year. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And just a last announcement before our closing remarks. Wanted to bring to your attention that we've been working with Rockefeller Foundation and Dr. Michael Bamberger, who's a longtime evaluator in the field, to bring, to publish this report, which is something we've really been looking at for about 3 years now. Lots of interest really from the start of the Global Pulse Project back in 2010 from the evaluation community, and sort of saying, well, that we could be one of the users of some of these new data sources, tools, and methods. It's a very, very comprehensive report that's available on our website at unglobalpulse.org. You can download it. It looks at sort of essentially not only a landscape analysis of the opportunity, but really a call to action to the evaluation community. Again, common theme, it's time to start. It talks about how to overcome some of the methodological challenges around representativeness and data access, some of the technologies people can get started with, and so forth. So if you're interested in new approaches to evaluation, we think there's a real opportunity here to dig in, and if you're interested in doing pilots in this space, we could be interested in partnering. So, at any rate, last announcement there. It's now my honor to welcome our dear colleague, Dr. Bitange Ndemo. As I mentioned, former permanent secretary of Kenya's Ministry of Information and Communication, and one of the early pioneers and really a force behind the open data movement that's now, thriving all around the world, and a member of our Data Privacy Advisory Group. Ndemo, please.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Okay. Before I make the final remarks, I want to take 2 minutes to brag on what I've been doing. Besides teaching at the University of Nairobi, we've been trying to create something for everybody in the world to be able to measure the first goal of the the SDGs, and that is poverty. I've been working with a team of former World Bank and some who are still with the World Bank to develop this, and I thought it would be appropriate that I share it with you here so that when you go out there, you can be able to use these tools. Now, we have been, all right, we've been trying to answer a few questions, that how many people are in the world at the moment, and where do the poor people live? This is now going from national data to subnational data. We've been able to do subnational data in Kenya, and how long will I live? How many people are in the world at the moment? We have created a poverty clock. We had some very nice visualization, but the browser here was not able to work on it. But if you have time, you can look at www.povertyclock.staging.population.io. You can see how many people are running away from poverty, and we're using $2 per day, and then some algorithms to show you how many people per second are coming out of poverty and how many people per second are dropping into poverty. This is very critical because if you understand those reasons that make people not move out of poverty, some of them were expounded here yesterday, like education, health, And these are all other goals within the SDGs. You begin to see that the first goal is very critical in understanding all the other goals that, all the other 16 goals, which make 17. And so I couldn't get enough time to show you that, but you can be able to see that. Where do poor people live is actually very critical. Having been a policymaker, especially in Africa, you are patriotic to your country when you say good things about the country, meaning you lie on behalf of the country by using the national average that is given, say, on mortality rates. But you find when you go into subnational level, you begin to see different things which politicians fear to say, because then it says about the distribution of wealth within the country. We have done within Kenya. We are hoping to do across Africa and other countries. We have a team in Vienna which is also working on other parts of the world. And hopefully, people would find this tool very essential in terms of measuring several aspects of the SDGs. The other one is, how long would I live? If your Wi-Fi is on, type www.population.io. If you get into that site and you put your date and your sex, you will be able to know when you die. This is important because we think that this is the first stage of what we want to do with that. If you look at the same date in other parts of the world, say, for example, if you lived in Indonesia, lived in Kenya, or lived in other countries, you'll see different numbers of years remaining. This is very critical because then you can ask yourself, what is it that I can do to change this number? Countries can ask, why would somebody here be living shorter than the one living here? And you probably find the reason behind that is because either malaria, HIV, smoking, and other things, which would actually lower your expected date of death. And then you can make some corrections. We are still working on various variables that impact life expectancy. And very soon you'll be able to understand from your own as an individual in terms of how to deal with that aspect. With those remarks, I want to also say that many things will be said in this conference. But I've seen from the time we met in Brazil, open data initiatives to hear every aspect of our life is being disrupted. The media is being disrupted by social media. The medical, the health side is being disrupted. The patients are more cleverer than doctors now. And my appeal to those of you from National Statistic Offices, you are undergoing through a process of disruption. And I hope there will be no resistance, because what I've seen in terms of policy in Africa, there are three types of resistance. One is out of selfishness, because it would disrupt your mechanism of corruption and other things. The other is out of fear that maybe I'll lose my job. The other one is out of malice, because you don't want the success and stuff. But I would say whatever we say here will not succeed if we keep on resisting and smiling at conferences that we're doing progress, reporting a few progress. In Kenya, for example, one of the poorest neighborhoods called Kibera, NGOs had inflated the number of people living there to 1 million. And the government did the census and found is 300,000. And the young people living in Kibera did this street mapping and found the actual population to be 170,000. So depending who you are, they have been seeing it differently until these young people brought these issues. But that is not the point. I want to relate it to a policy measure that we worked on. Government had just passed a policy that those students that go to private schools cannot access elite public schools. And after the mapping, we discovered that the government had only 4% of schools in Kibra. And when we presented to the Minister for Education, he saw that the government had more schools. And we said, every asset has been mapped here. He was actually very shocked. And that's when they revised the policy, because most schools were run by church groups and other groups, and not the government as he had thought. So that changed. Last month, I was here, just 1 hour away from here, a place called Kailitsa, one of the poorest places. We went to see one of the maker spaces, and we found the people working there saying sometimes they don't get enough of the poor to come to the maker space, simply because the math they did in high school is not the right mathematics that would allow them to do computers. It is the math that was advanced by the apartheid regime. What stops the government of South Africa from changing that policy and saying every young child must go through this mathematics? Yes, they would fail. In Kenya, they spectacularly failed. But when you get them to such programs, they remember a few things and they become useful in those areas. I think there are some where numbers can tell us. But let me conclude with these few remarks. And I said I would read them because sometimes I say things, then I skip others. We need a new policy framework. We need a new policy framework as Africans. And allow me to use the word Africans because sometimes we caucus and say, what are these Westerns wanting the numbers from us? Yeah, it's nonsense. They have all the numbers, more than you need even. So as Africans, we need a new policy framework. Safe and responsible use of big data is about more than privacy protection, which we use as an excuse. It's also about making sure that whenever possible, big data is used, whatever possible big data is used to drive progress towards sustainable development and protect the vulnerable from harm. This will require regulators, companies with the data, and potential users of innovative data-driven solutions to work together on a new approach. If you look at the analytics of the mobile data in Kenya, especially on mobile money, they will give you better consumption data than the National Statistics Office. So we need some level of collaboration, both private and public, to be able to get the actuals that we need. Second is that the private sector has to step up and come together around data philanthropy, because most private sector want to use their data for competitive advantage, but there are some areas where they can do data philanthropy. As many of you are aware, mobile industry has already begun to explore how to put insights from the big data produced by mobile phones to work for the public good. Yes, still there is no industry-wide standards for anonymizing and sharing this data, and a few examples of enterprise-ready applications that put the power of this data in the hands of the Ministry of Health, Labor, or Transportation. Efforts are underway to change this, and they need further investment, and other industries such as banking, e-commerce, transportation should follow suit in figuring out how to unlock the power of their data in a way that is scalable and sustainable. You see, even the banking sector, which resisted the entry of mobile money, now they find that the mobile companies understand the credit worth of their customers better than the banking sector understands them. I think there is need to be some collaboration. The last point is that civil society needs to recognize big data for what it is, an issue of rights. Citizens need to recognize that just as they have a right to data privacy, they also have a right to a guarantee that the data they produce merely by going about their daily lives would put to use for their benefit. Alongside current efforts to inform the public about what data is collected from them and the risks it poses to their privacy, they also need to be made aware of the opportunity costs they pay every year in terms of socio-economic and environmental progress because of the policies and programs. The programs aren't taking advantage of that same data to work smarter. And I know some of the civil society talk about privacy, but they don't talk about the opportunity cost. We all need to do something out of this conference. We leave this conference knowing that we will do our part. The government must realize the disruption process is going on and free some of the data. The civil society understand these rights in relation to the benefits. So every one of us who has come here has some kind of work to do after we leave here. Thank you very much.
Demo, thank you so much for your insights and sharing your experience. Thank you to all of you for your time and attention today. We're a little bit late, and I think lunch is happening. But at any rate, we will all be here this week and look forward to speaking with you if you have a chance. Have a good conference, everyone. Take care.